David Matthews sat in his empty apartment and stared at his laptop screen. The divorce papers were signed 3 days ago. His wife Sarah had taken most of their things. The walls were bare now. Only his computer, a small table, and an old chair remained. He had been looking at the same website for 2 hours. It showed cabins for sale in faraway places. David did not want to stay in Seattle anymore. Everything here reminded him of Sarah and their broken marriage. He needed to go somewhere, new, somewhere quiet, somewhere he could think. His phone buzzed. Another message from his boss asking when he would return to work. David had taken time off after the divorce, but his boss was getting angry. David looked at the phone and turned it off. He did not want to think about work either. The laptop screen showed a small cabin in the mountains. The price was very low. Too low, David thought. But the pictures looked nice. The cabin was made of wood and had a red roof. Trees surrounded it on all sides. The listing said it was in Summit Ridge, a small town he had never heard of. David read the description again. Remote mountain cabin on 5 acres of private land. Perfect for someone who wants peace and quiet. No neighbors for miles. Beautiful views of the mountains. There were only 3 pictures. One showed the outside of the cabin. Another showed a small kitchen inside. The third picture was of the mountains behind the property. David liked what he saw. The place looked lonely, just like he felt. He picked up his phone and called the real estate agent. A woman answered after 2 rings. "Hello, this is Janet speaking. How can I help you?" "I am calling about the cabin in Summit Ridge," David said. "Is it still for sale?" "Oh yes, that property is still available. Are you interested in seeing it?" David thought for a moment. "How far is it from Seattle?" "About 4 hours by car. It is quite remote. The nearest town is small, and the cabin itself is very isolated. Are you sure that is what you want?" "Yes," David said quickly. "I want to buy it." Janet was quiet for a few seconds. "Well, that is wonderful, but do you not want to see it first? Most people like to visit before they make such a big decision." "No, I trust the pictures. How much do you need for a down payment?" "Sir, I really think you should visit first. The cabin has been empty for several months. It might need some work, and the location is very isolated. There is no cell phone service up there." David smiled for the first time in weeks. No cell phone service sounded perfect. "That is exactly what I want. Can we do this deal today?" Janet sighed. "If you are sure, then yes. I can email you the papers. But please remember, once you sign, there is no going back. The previous owner left very suddenly. He said the place was too quiet for him." "Too quiet sounds good to me," David said. 2 hours later, David had signed all the papers online. He had bought a cabin he had never seen in a place he had never been. His bank account was much smaller now, but he did not care. He owned something that was completely his. David spent the rest of the day packing his few things into boxes. He did not have much left after the divorce. Some clothes, his computer, a few books, and basic kitchen items. Everything fit into his car easily. The next morning, David left Seattle before the sun came up. He wanted to reach the cabin while there was still daylight. The drive took him through small towns and winding mountain roads. The higher he went, the fewer people he saw. As he drove, David thought about his old life. He had worked at the same tech company for 8 years. He made good money, but the work was stressful. Sarah had complained that he worked too much. She said he never had time for her. Maybe she was right. But when she left him for her yoga teacher, David realized that work was all he had. The GPS on his phone stopped working after 3 hours of driving. David had to use an old paper map he found in his glove box. The roads got smaller and more twisted. Pine trees pressed close on both sides. He passed a sign that said, "Summit Ridge, population 847. The town was tiny. David saw a small store, a gas station, and a few old houses. Some people walked on the sidewalks, but they moved slowly. Everyone looked at his car as he drove through. He felt like a stranger, which he was. The map showed that his cabin was 5 more miles up a narrow dirt road. David turned off the main street and started climbing. The road was rough and full of holes. His car bounced and shook. Trees blocked most of the sunlight. After 20 minutes of careful driving, David saw a mailbox with numbers that matched his address. He turned into a driveway that was barely wide enough for his car. Branches scraped against his windows as he drove. Then he saw it. His cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by tall pine trees. It looked exactly like the pictures, but smaller than he had expected. The wood was dark brown and looked old but strong. The red roof had some missing pieces. David parked his car and got out. The silence hit him immediately. No traffic noise. No city sounds. Just wind in the trees and birds singing somewhere far away. He took a deep breath of clean mountain air. He walked up to the front door and used the key that Janet had mailed to him. The door opened with a loud creak. Inside, the cabin was dim and dusty. Sunlight came through small windows. The main room had a stone fireplace and old wooden furniture covered with white sheets. David pulled the sheets off a couch and a table. The furniture was simple but looked handmade and solid. The kitchen was small but had everything he needed. A narrow staircase led to a loft bedroom upstairs. As David explored his new home, he felt something he had not felt in months. Peace. This place was completely different from his busy life in Seattle. Here, he could think clearly. Here, he could figure out what to do next with his life. He brought his boxes in from the car as the sun began to set. The cabin had electricity, which surprised him. There was also running water, though it tasted different from city water. By the time darkness fell, David had unpacked his few things and made the cabin feel a little more like home. That night, David sat on the front porch and looked up at more stars than he had ever seen. The quiet was so complete that he could hear his own heartbeat. For the first time since his divorce, he felt like he might be okay. He did not notice the fresh flowers sitting in a vase by the front door. He did not see the loaf of warm bread, wrapped in cloth on his kitchen counter. These things would wait until morning to surprise him. David woke up to sunlight streaming through the cabin windows. He had slept better than he had in months. The silence of the mountains was like a soft blanket around him. No car horns, no sirens, no neighbors arguing through thin walls. He stretched and walked to the kitchen to make coffee. That was when he saw it. A loaf of bread sat on his counter wrapped in a clean white cloth. David stopped and stared. He was sure this had not been there when he went to bed. David picked up the bread. It was still warm. The smell was amazing, like fresh baking from a real oven. His heart started beating faster. Someone had been in his cabin while he slept. He checked all the doors and windows. Everything was locked from the inside, just as he had left them. But the bread was real. David touched it again to make sure he was not dreaming. Then he remembered the real estate agent saying the previous owner had left suddenly. Maybe someone else had a key. Maybe the bread was left over from before. But it was warm. Fresh bread. Did not stay warm all night. David made his coffee and ate a piece of the bread. It was the best bread he had ever tasted. Sweet and soft, with a perfect crust. Whoever made it knew what they were doing. After breakfast, David decided to explore his property. The real estate listing had said 5 acres, but he wanted to see exactly what he owned. He put on his hiking boots and walked outside. The morning air was cool and clean. David could see his breath in small puffs. He walked around the cabin first, looking at the foundation and the roof. The building was old but in good shape. Someone had taken care of it. Behind the cabin, David found a small trail that led into the trees. He followed it for a few minutes and discovered something the real estate pictures had not shown. A beautiful garden was hidden in a clearing about 50 yards from his back door. The garden was not wild. Someone had planted it and cared for it. Neat rows of vegetables grew in rich, dark soil. Tomatoes, carrots, beans, and plants David did not recognize. A small wooden fence kept animals out. Tools hung on hooks attached to a nearby tree. David walked between the rows of plants. Everything looked healthy and well-watered. Fresh footprints in the soil showed that someone had been here very recently, maybe this morning. Hello there. David spun around. A young woman stood at the edge of the garden. She had long, dark hair and wore simple work clothes. Dirt covered her hands and knees like she had been working in the soil. I am sorry if I scared you, she said with a gentle smile. I am Elena Summit. David tried to catch his breath. You scared me a little. I did not hear you coming. Move quietly in the woods. I have been doing it since I was a child. Elena walked closer. You must be the new owner of the cabin. Yes, I am David Matthews. I just arrived yesterday. David looked around the garden. Is this yours? Elena nodded. My family has cared for this land for many years. My grandfather made an arrangement with the man who owned the cabin before you. I keep the garden and maintain the property. In return, I can stay in the small shed when I need to. David had not seen any shed. Where is this shed? Elena pointed deeper into the trees. It is small and hidden. I try not to bother the people who live in the cabin. Most owners do not even know I'm here. But you left bread in my kitchen. Elena smiled again. Yes, it is a tradition. My grandmother always welcomed new people with fresh bread. I hope you do not mind that I came inside. I have a key from the old arrangement. David did not know what to think. This woman had a key to his house and had been inside while he slept. In the city, this would be frightening. But Elena seemed kind and harmless, and the bread had been wonderful. The bread was very good, David said. Thank you. You are welcome. I bake every few days. I can share with you if you like. David looked around the garden again. The vegetables were beautiful and healthy. Elena clearly knew what she was doing. How long have you been taking care of this place? Many years, Elena said. She did not give a more specific answer. My family has deep roots in this land. We understand how to work with the mountain, not against it. What about the previous owner? Did he know you were here? Elena's face grew sad. Mr. Henderson was not comfortable with the old ways. He wanted me to leave. That is why he sold the cabin so quickly. David felt sorry for Elena. She obviously loved this place and worked hard to care for it. Well, I do not mind if you stay. The garden is beautiful and I know nothing about growing food. Elena's whole face lit up. Really? You do not mind? Not at all, but I would like to see this shed you mentioned, and maybe we can talk about a more official arrangement. Elena led David through the trees to a small building he never would have found alone. It was built into the side of a hill and covered with plants. From a distance, it looked like just another part of the forest. Inside, the shed was simple but comfortable. A small bed, a table, some shelves with books, and basic supplies. Everything was clean and organized. A few personal items showed that Elena really did live here sometimes. This is cozy, David said. How often do you stay here? It depends on the seasons and what work needs to be done. Sometimes I travel to other places for jobs, but I always come back. This is my home. They walked back to the garden together. Elena showed David the different plants and explained how she rotated crops to keep the soil healthy. She knew every plant by name and could tell when they would be ready to harvest. Where did you learn all this? David asked. My grandfather taught me, and his grandfather taught him. My family has been farming these mountains since they first came here in the 1800s. David was impressed. That is a long family history. Elena nodded but did not say more about her family. David sensed there was more to the story, but he did not want to push. Elena seemed private about personal things. They spent the morning working in the garden together. Elena showed David how to tell which vegetables were ready to pick. They harvested tomatoes, beans, and carrots for lunch. Elena cooked the vegetables in a small outdoor fire pit near the garden. She seemed to know exactly how long to cook everything. The food tasted better than any restaurant meal David had ever eaten. This is amazing, David said. I have never tasted vegetables this good. Food tastes better when you grow it yourself, Elena said. When you put love and care into the soil, the plants give that love back to you. After lunch, Elena showed David more of his property. She knew every tree, every rock, every stream. She pointed out animal tracks and explained which creatures lived in different parts of the forest. That tree is over 200 years old. Elena said, pointing to a massive pine. My great-grandfather used to sit under it when he was a boy. David realized Elena knew more about his land than he ever would. She belonged here in a way he might never understand. As the afternoon grew late, Elena said she needed to go to town for supplies. I will be back tomorrow to water the garden. Is that okay? Of course. This is your home too. Elena smiled. Thank you, David. You are very kind. After Elena left, David sat on his porch and thought about his strange first full day. He had bought a cabin and gotten a caretaker he never knew existed. Elena was mysterious, but she seemed honest and good, and she clearly loved this place. David looked out at the mountains and felt grateful. Maybe buying this cabin sight unseen had been a good decision after all. Maybe this was exactly what he needed. He did not notice that Elena had mentioned her great-grandfather as if she had known him personally. He did not think about how young Elena looked to have so much knowledge about old family traditions. These questions would come later. For now, David was just happy to not be alone. 3 days after meeting Elena, David realized he needed supplies. His small box of food from Seattle was almost empty, and he wanted to buy tools to help Elena in the garden. He also needed to learn more about his new hometown. David drove down the winding dirt road and into Summit Ridge. In daylight, the town looked even smaller than it had when he first arrived. Most of the buildings were old and made of wood. Paint peeled from many walls, and some windows were boarded up. The main street had only a few businesses. Henderson's general store seemed to be the biggest. A small diner called Mountain View Cafe sat next to a gas station. David saw a post office, a bank, and what looked like a library. Everything moved slowly here. A few people walked on the sidewalks, but no one seemed to be in a hurry. David parked in front of Henderson's general store. A bell rang when he opened the door. Inside, the store was dark and crowded with shelves. It smelled like old wood and coffee. An elderly woman sat behind the counter reading a newspaper. Good morning, David said. I am David Matthews. I just bought the cabin up on Summit Ridge Road. The woman looked up from her paper. She had gray hair and sharp blue eyes. Oh, you are the one who bought the old Henderson place. I am Martha. Henderson? That was my late husband's family property. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Henderson. I love the cabin. It is exactly what I was looking for. Mrs. Henderson smiled, but her eyes stayed serious. City folk often think they want the quiet mountain life, but it can be harder than people expect, especially up on that ridge. Very isolated up there. David picked up a shopping basket and started walking through the store. I like the quiet, and I am not completely alone. Elena Summit has been helping me with the property. Mrs. Henderson dropped her newspaper. Elena Summit? Did you say Elena Summit? Yes. She has been taking care of the garden behind my cabin. She seems very nice and knows a lot about the land. Mrs. Henderson came out from behind the counter. She was a small woman, but she moved quickly. Young man, sit down, we need to talk. David was confused, but he sat in a chair by the counter. Mrs. Henderson looked around the store to make sure they were alone. What did this Elena look like? Mrs. Henderson asked in a quiet voice. She is young, maybe late 20s. Long, dark hair. Very pretty. She said her family has taken care of the land for generations. Mrs. Henderson shook her head slowly. That is impossible. What do you mean impossible? No Summit has lived in these parts for over 20 years. The last of the Summit family left when Elena was just a child. David felt cold suddenly. But she told me her family had an arrangement with the previous owner. She has a key to my cabin. The Summit family did own most of the land around here many years ago, but there was a terrible accident. After that, they all moved away. Thomas Summit sold everything and left with his little daughter. That was in 2003 or 2004. Maybe Elena came, back as an adult, David suggested. Maybe she wanted to see her family's old land. Mrs. Henderson walked to an old filing cabinet behind the counter. She pulled out a folder and opened it on the counter. Inside were old newspaper clippings and photographs. This is the Summit family, she said, pointing to a photograph. This picture was taken right before they left. David looked at the photograph. It showed a man, a woman, and a young girl who looked about 7 years old. The woman in the picture looked exactly like the Elena he had met, but the photograph was old and faded. The little girl is Elena Summit, Mrs. Henderson said. She would be about 30 years old now if this is the same person. David studied the photograph more carefully. The woman looked like Elena, but older. The little girl had Elena's dark hair and eyes, but she was clearly a child. Maybe Elena is the daughter, David said. Maybe she grew up and came back. Mrs. Henderson pulled out another paper. This is Elena Summit's birth certificate, born March 15, 1996. If she was alive today, she would be 29 years old. David did not understand. The Elena I met looks like she could be 29. But look at this. Mrs. Henderson showed him another photograph. This one was more recent, maybe 10 years old. It showed the same little girl, but older. She looked like a teenager now, but her face was exactly like the Elena David knew. This picture was taken by a hiker in 2015, Mrs. Henderson said. Someone saw a young woman living in the old Summit homestead ruins. But when the sheriff went to check, no one was there. David's hand started to shake. Are you saying the Elena I met is the same person in these old photographs? I am saying something strange is happening up on that mountain. And you need to be very careful. Mrs. Henderson put the papers back in the folder. The Summit family was special. Old-timers said they had gifts. They could make things grow in soil where nothing should grow. They knew things about the mountain that other people did not know. Some people said they made deals with the spirit of the mountain itself. That sounds like superstition, David said. Maybe it is. But I have lived in this town for 70 years. I have seen things that do not make sense. And I know that Summit Ridge has always been different from other places. David bought his supplies, but his mind was spinning. Mrs. Henderson's story did not make sense, but the photographs were real. The woman in the old pictures looked exactly like the Elena he had met. David decided to eat lunch at the Mountain View Cafe before going home. Maybe other people in town could tell him more about the Summit family. The cafe was small and warm. Only a few tables were occupied. David ordered coffee and a sandwich from a middle-aged waitress named Betty. You are new in town, Betty said. It was not a question. Yes. I bought the cabin up on Summit Ridge Road. Betty's smile disappeared. That is Summit Land. Old Summit Land. I met someone who said she was Elena Summit. She has been taking care of the property. Betty sat down across from David without being invited. Honey, you need to listen to me. Elena Summit died 20 years ago. David almost choked on his coffee. What? There was an accident. Elena's mother fell through the ice. On Summit Lake, Elena tried to save her. They both drowned. Thomas Summit found their bodies 3 days later. But I just met Elena yesterday. She cooked vegetables from the garden. We talked for hours. Betty shook her head. I do not know who you met, but it was not Elena Summit. That girl has been dead for 20 years. David paid for his lunch and left the cafe quickly. His head was spinning with confusion and fear. 2 people in town had told him Elena was dead, but he had just spent 3 days with her. She was real. She had cooked food and shown him the garden. On the drive back to his cabin, David tried to think logically. Maybe there was another explanation. Maybe Elena had a sister or cousin with the same name. Maybe the town people were confused. But deep down, David knew something was wrong. Elena had been vague about her family and her past. She had a key to his cabin, but no official arrangement. She knew things about the land that seemed to come from much older knowledge than her age should allow. David parked at his cabin and sat in his car for a few minutes. He looked at his new home and wondered what he had gotten himself into. The mountain was beautiful, but it was also mysterious and maybe dangerous. He decided to search the cabin more carefully. Maybe he could find clues about the previous owners and their connection to Elena. In the main room, David moved furniture and looked behind pictures on the walls. In a closet upstairs, he found a loose floorboard. Under the board was a small metal box. Inside the box were letters, photographs, and legal papers. Most were about the Summit family and their ownership of the land. David found the deed that showed when Thomas Summit sold the property in 2004. But at the bottom of the box, David found something that made his blood run cold. It was a recent photograph of Elena, the same Elena he had met. But the photograph was dated 2 weeks ago, and written on the back in careful handwriting were the words, "Elena Summit still waiting." David dropped the photograph and backed away from the box. Someone had been watching the cabin. Someone knew Elena was there. But who had taken the picture? And what did "still waiting" mean? As the sun began to set, David realized he was afraid to sleep in the cabin alone. Whatever was happening here was bigger and stranger than he had imagined. Elena might be dead, but someone who looked exactly like her was living on his property. David made sure all the doors and windows were locked. He put a chair against the front door and kept a flashlight next to his bed. He did not know what Elena really was, but he knew she would probably come back, and he was not sure if he wanted to see her again. David barely slept that night. Every small sound made him jump. The wind in the trees sounded like footsteps. Branches scratching against the cabin walls sounded like someone trying to get inside, but Elena did not come. When morning came, David felt tired and confused. He made coffee and tried to think clearly about what he had learned in town. The people said Elena was dead, but David had seen her and talked with her. She was real. Maybe the town people were wrong. Maybe there had been a mistake about Elena's death. David decided to look for more information about the Summit family and what had really happened 20 years ago. David spent the morning searching through the metal box he had found. The papers told a story of a family that had lived on this mountain for over 150 years. The first Summit to come here was Elena's great-great-grandfather, Marcus Summit. He had bought the land in 1847 and built the first cabin. Each generation of Summits had added to the property and taken care of the land. They grew food, raised animals, and lived quietly in the mountains. According to the papers, they were good, people who helped their neighbors and never caused trouble. But David found something strange in the old records. The Summit family seemed to live much longer than normal people. Marcus Summit had lived to be 97 years old in a time when most people died much younger. His son lived to 94. His grandson lived to 101. Even stranger, the women in the family all looked very young in photographs, even when the dates showed they should have been old. David found a picture of Elena's grandmother taken when she was supposedly 60 years old. She looked like she was 30. Around noon, David heard footsteps on his porch. His heart started beating fast, but when he looked out the window, he saw Elena walking toward the garden. She looked exactly the same as she had 3 days ago. Real and solid and alive. David watched Elena work in the garden for a few minutes. She moved naturally and easily, pulling weeds and checking plants. If she was a ghost or spirit, she was very good at pretending to be human. David took a deep breath and walked outside. "Good morning, Elena." Elena looked up and smiled. "Good morning, David. How are you today?" "I am okay. Elena, I went to town yesterday. I talked to some people about you and your family." Elena's smile faded a little. "What did they tell you?" "They said you died 20 years ago. They said you and your mother drowned in Summit Lake." Elena stopped working and stood up slowly. She brushed dirt off her hands and looked directly at David. "What do you think?" "I think you are standing right here talking to me. So either the people in town are wrong or something very strange is happening." Elena walked over to a large rock at the edge of the garden and sat down. She was quiet for a long time, looking at the mountains in the distance. "The people in town are not wrong," Elena finally said. "My mother and I did die 20 years ago." David felt his stomach drop. "But you are here. You are real. Yes, I am here. And yes, I am real. But I am also dead." Elena looked at David with sad eyes. "It is complicated." David sat down on another rock. His legs felt weak. "I do not understand." Elena sighed. "My family has always been different, David. We have gifts that other people do not have. We can make things grow. We can talk to animals. We can see things that others cannot see. And sometimes when we die, we do not stay dead. That is impossible. Is it? You have seen me work in the garden. You have eaten food I cooked. You have talked with me for hours. Does any of that feel impossible? David had to admit that Elena seemed completely real. But how? How can you be dead and still be here? Elena picked up a handful of soil from the garden. This land is special, David. My family has taken care of it for so long that we have become part of it. The mountain holds our spirits when our bodies die, but only if we choose to stay. Why did you choose to stay? Elena's eyes filled with tears. I did not choose at first. When my mother and I fell through the ice, I was only 9 years old. I was scared and did not want to leave my father alone. The mountain felt my fear and kept me here. David was starting to understand, but he was also starting to feel afraid. What about your mother? Did she stay too? No. My mother was ready to go. She had lived a full life and was not afraid of death. She told me goodbye and went to whatever comes next. But I stayed. Elena stood up and walked to the edge of the garden where it met the forest. For 20 years, I have been stuck between life and death. I look the same as I did when I died. I do not age. I do not get sick. But I also cannot leave this mountain. What about your father? Does he know you are here? Elena's face became very sad. My father thinks I am dead. After the accident, he could not bear to stay here. All he could see were memories of my mother and me. He sold the land and moved away. But you said he still lives in town. He came back 5 years ago. He is old now and sick. He lives in a care home and does not remember much. Sometimes I visit him, but he thinks I am just a dream or a memory. David felt sorry for Elena and her father. That must be very lonely for you. It has been lonely. That is why I take care of the people who live in the cabin. It gives me something to do and someone to talk to. How many people have lived here since your father sold the property? Elena thought for a moment. You are the 7th owner. Some stayed for a few months, others stayed for a few years, but they all left eventually. Why did they leave? Different reasons. Some found the isolation too difficult. Others got scared when they learned about me. One man tried to have me removed by the police, but I can hide when I need to. David looked at the cabin and then back at Elena. Are you going to hurt me? Elena looked surprised. Hurt you? No, David. I would never hurt anyone. I am not an evil spirit. I am just a girl who died too young and got stuck between worlds. Then, why are you telling me all this? You could have kept it secret. Elena walked back to where David was sitting. Because you are different from the others. You are kind and gentle. You did not get angry when you found me here. You let me stay and help with the garden. I think you might understand. Understand what? Elena sat down next to David on the rock. There is something I have not told you yet, about why I am really here. David felt nervous again. What is it? My grandfather made a promise before he died. He promised that a summit would always take care of this land. But when my father sold the property, that promise was broken. What kind of promise? A magical promise. A binding that connects our family to the mountain itself. When the promise was broken, bad things started to happen. Plants died, animals left. The mountain became angry. Elena picked up another handful of soil. I stayed here to keep the promise alive. As long as a summit takes care of the land, the mountain stays healthy and peaceful. But you said you have been here for 20 years. The mountain looks healthy, to me. It is healthy because I have been working every day to keep it that way. But I am only one person, and I am not fully alive. The promise needs to be fulfilled properly. David was quiet for a few minutes, thinking about everything Elena had told him. What does fulfilled properly mean? Elena looked directly into David's eyes. The promise will be complete when someone new agrees to take care of the land with the same love that my family has shown for generations. Someone who will stay here permanently and become part of the mountain's story. And what happens to you when the promise is fulfilled? Elena smiled sadly. I do not know. Maybe I will finally be able to rest. Maybe I will move on to wherever my mother went. Or maybe I will stay but be free to leave the mountain sometimes. David felt a strange feeling in his chest. Are you asking me to fulfill this promise? I am not asking anything, David. I am just telling you the truth about this place and about me. What you do with that information is your choice. Elena stood up and brushed off her clothes. I should go now. You need time to think about everything I have told you. Wait, David said. Can I ask you one more question? Of course. Do you want to fulfill the promise? Do you want to be free? Elena was quiet for a long moment. I have wanted to be free for 20 years, but I have also been afraid. This mountain is the only home I have ever known, and being dead, but not gone, is the only existence I understand. Elena started walking toward the forest. Think about what I have told you, David, but do not be afraid of me. I am not your enemy. After Elena disappeared into the trees, David sat alone in the garden for a long time. His logical mind told him that Elena's story was impossible. People did not come back from the dead to take care of gardens and fulfill magical promises. But his heart told him something different. Elena felt real and honest. The garden was beautiful and healthy under her care, and David had felt peace on this mountain from the moment he arrived. Maybe some things did not need to make logical sense. Maybe some things just needed to be accepted and experienced. David looked around at his new home and realized he had a big decision to make. Elena had not asked him to fulfill her family's promise, but he could tell that was what she hoped for. The question was David ready to make this mountain his permanent home? And was he ready to believe in magic? For 3 days after Elena told him the truth, David thought about nothing else. He walked around his property, looking at every tree and rock with new eyes. He tried to feel the magic that Elena said lived in the mountain, but all he felt was confusion. During the day, David could almost convince himself that Elena's story was just imagination. But at night, when the mountain was dark and quiet, he felt something watching him, something old and patient and waiting. Elena did not come back during those 3 days. David found fresh vegetables by his door each morning, but he never saw her. He wondered if she was giving him space to think or if she was afraid he would tell her to leave. On the 4th day, David could not stand the silence anymore. He walked to the garden and called Elena's name. No answer came from the forest. David called louder, feeling foolish but also desperate. Elena, I know you can hear me. Please come out. I want to talk to you. After a few minutes, Elena appeared from behind a large pine tree. She looked nervous and sad. Hello, David. I was not sure you would want to see me again. Why would you think that? Elena walked closer but stopped several feet away from David. Most people get scared when they learn what I really am. They think I am dangerous or evil. I do not think you are evil, but I am confused about a lot of things. Elena nodded. What do you want to know? David had spent 3 days making a list of questions in his mind. First, tell me more about this promise. What exactly did your grandfather promise? Elena sat down on the ground next to the garden. My grandfather was dying when he made the promise. He had taken care of this land for his whole life, just like his father and grandfather before him. He was worried about what would happen after he died. What was he worried about? The mountain is alive, David. Not like an animal or a person, but alive in its own way. It has feelings and memories and needs. My family learned how to work with the mountain instead of fighting against it. Elena picked up a small stone and held it in her palm. Most people see land as something to use. They cut down trees for wood. They dig up soil for farming. They build roads and houses without thinking about what the land wants. What does the land want? To be cared for, to be loved, to be treated as a partner instead of a tool. Elena set the stone down gently. My grandfather promised the mountain spirit that a summit would always be here to provide that care and love. David sat down next to Elena. But your father broke that promise when he sold the land. Yes. My father was too sad after my mother and I died. He could not bear to stay here anymore. When he sold the property, the promise was broken. What happened when the promise was broken? Elena's face became dark. Bad things. Plants started dying for no reason. Animals stopped coming to drink from the streams. The weather became strange and dangerous. People in town got sick more often. But you stayed here. Did that help? A little. I am still a summit, and I still love this land. But I am not fully alive, so my care is not as powerful as it should be. The mountain has been patient with me, but it needs a living person to fulfill the promise completely. David looked around the garden. Everything here looked healthy and beautiful. The land seems fine to me. This small area is fine because I work here every day, but the rest of the mountain is still suffering. I cannot be everywhere at once, and my power is limited. Elena stood up and walked to the edge of the garden. Do you want to see what I mean? David followed Elena into the forest. She led him along trails he had not noticed before. At first, everything looked normal. But as they walked further from the cabin, David began to see problems. Many trees had brown, dying leaves even though it was summer. Streams that should have been flowing were almost dry. David saw several dead animals lying in the forest, though Elena quickly led him past them. This is what happens when the mountain is not properly cared for, Elena said. It is slowly dying. They walked for an hour before Elena led David to a high cliff that overlooked the entire valley. From here, David could see the town of Summit Ridge far below. He could also see that the healthy green forest around his cabin gradually became brown and sick as it got further away. The damage spreads a little more each year, Elena said. If the promise is not fulfilled soon, the entire mountain will die. And when the mountain dies, the town below will die too. David felt overwhelmed by the responsibility Elena was describing. What exactly would I have to do to fulfill this promise? Elena turned to face him. You would have to agree to stay here, permanently, and care for the land the way my family has done for generations. You would have to learn the old ways of working with the mountain spirit. What are the old ways? Growing food without chemicals that hurt the soil. Taking only what you need from the forest and giving back more than you take. Listening to what the land tells you about weather and seasons and animal movements. Elena sat down on a large rock at the edge of the cliff. But most importantly, you would have to make a commitment to never leave. The mountain has been abandoned once. It will not risk being abandoned again. David felt a chill run down his spine. Never leave? What if I get sick and need a hospital? What if I change my mind? There would be no changing your mind. Once you make the promise, you become part of the mountain forever, just like my family has been for generations. That sounds like being a prisoner. Elena shook her head. It is not being a prisoner. It is being chosen. My family was never unhappy here. We loved this place and found everything we needed on the mountain. But what about the outside world? What about travel and career and meeting new people? Elena was quiet for a long moment. Those things would no longer be part of your life, but you would gain other things: peace, purpose, a connection to something much larger than yourself. David walked to the edge of the cliff and looked down at the valley. His old life in Seattle seemed very far away. His job, his failed marriage, his empty apartment, none of those things had made him happy. What happens if I say no? David asked. Then I will continue to do what I can for as long as possible. But eventually, my power will fade completely. The mountain will die and I will finally be allowed to rest. And if I say yes? Elena smiled for the first time in days. Then the promise will be fulfilled. The mountain will become healthy again. And what about you? I do not know. The promise was made by my grandfather, not by me. Once it is fulfilled, I might be free to move on. Or I might be allowed to stay and help you learn how to care for the land. David could tell that Elena hoped she would be allowed to stay. After 20 years of loneliness, she wanted a companion. Can I think about it for a few more days? David asked. Of course. This is the biggest decision of your life. You should be sure. They walked back to the cabin in comfortable silence. David's mind was spinning with thoughts and questions. Elena's offer was both frightening and appealing. He would give up his freedom, but he would gain a purpose he had never had before. That evening, Elena cooked dinner for both of them using vegetables from the garden. They ate on the porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains. David realized this was the most peaceful he had felt in years. "Elena," David said as they finished eating, "can I ask you something personal?" "Yes." "Are you lonely?" Elena set down her fork and looked at the darkening sky. "Very lonely. For 20 years I have had no one to really talk to. The people who lived in the cabin before you were kind, but they never knew who I really was. Do you ever regret staying here after you died?" Elena thought carefully before answering. "Sometimes. I wonder what my life would have been like if I had lived to grow up normally. I wonder if I would have gone to school, gotten married, had children. Those are normal things to wonder about. But then I look at this mountain and remember how much I love it. I think about the animals and plants that depend on me. And I think that maybe this is what I was meant to do with my existence, even if it is not the existence I planned." David felt a deep sadness for Elena. She had sacrificed her entire life and afterlife for this place. She had given up everything a normal person would want. "Elena, what do you want most in the world?" Elena looked directly at David. "I want someone to stay with me. Someone who loves this place as much as I do. Someone who understands that some things are more important than personal freedom." David understood what Elena was really asking. She was not just looking for someone to fulfill her grandfather's promise. She was looking for a companion, someone to share the beauty and responsibility of this magical place. "I think I am starting to understand," David said. Elena smiled. "Understanding is the first step, but you still need to decide if you can make this commitment." That night, David lay in his bed and thought about his life before the mountain. He had worked at a job that stressed him and paid him well, but gave him no satisfaction. He had been married to a woman who did not really know him or love him. He had lived in a city that was full of people but where he felt completely alone. Here on the mountain, David felt peaceful for the first time in years. He enjoyed working in the garden with Elena. He loved the silence and beauty of the forest. And he was starting to care deeply about Elena herself. Maybe giving up his old life would not be a sacrifice. Maybe it would be a gift. Over the next 2 weeks, David and Elena spent every day together. Elena taught David how to read the signs that the mountain gave about weather and seasons. She showed him which plants could be used for medicine and which berries were safe to eat. David learned how to listen to the forest and feel its moods. In return, David helped Elena with projects around the property. They repaired the roof of the cabin where some shingles had come loose. They built a better fence around the garden to keep deer away from the vegetables. They cleared fallen trees from the trails that led through the forest. Working together felt natural to both of them. Elena knew everything about the land, and David was good with tools and fixing things. They made a good team. During their work, David and Elena talked about everything. Elena told David stories about her family and the early days of Summit Ridge. David told Elena about his life in Seattle, his failed marriage, and his dreams for the future. "I never felt like I belonged in the city," David said one afternoon as they picked apples from an old tree behind the cabin. "Everyone was always rushing to get somewhere, but no one seemed to know why. My family always said that modern people have forgotten how to be still," Elena replied. "They think happiness comes from moving fast and having many things." "What do you think happiness comes from?" Elena climbed higher in the apple tree to reach the best fruit. "I think happiness comes from being connected to something larger than yourself. My family found that connection through caring for this land." David held the basket while Elena dropped apples into it. "Do you think I could find that connection here?" Elena looked down at David from her perch in the tree. "I think you are already finding it. You have been here for 3 weeks, and you seem more peaceful every day." David realized Elena was right. The stress and sadness that had followed him from Seattle were slowly disappearing. He slept better at night. He smiled more during the day. He felt like he was becoming the person he was meant to be. One evening, as they sat by a fire pit near the garden, Elena told David more about her father. His name is Thomas Summit. He is 74 years old now and lives at the Sunset Care Home in town. He has dementia and does not remember much about his life. That must be very hard for you to see. Elena poked at the fire with a stick. It is sometimes when I visit him he remembers me as a little girl. He asks where my mother is and when we are coming home. I do not have the heart to remind him that we are both dead. Do you visit him often? Once a week. I sit with him and tell him stories about the mountain. Even when he does not remember who I am, the stories seem to make him happy. David felt sorry for both Elena and her father. What was he like when you were alive? Elena smiled at the memory. He was wonderful. He taught me everything about the mountain, how to plant seeds at the right time of year, how to find fresh water during dry seasons, how to speak to the animals so they would not be afraid. Speak to the animals? Not with words, with feelings and intentions. Animals can sense when a person means them harm or when a person wants to help. My father taught me how to project peaceful thoughts so wild animals would trust me. Can you still do that? Elena nodded. Watch this. Elena made a soft clicking sound with her tongue. After a few minutes, a large deer walked into the clearing near their fire. The deer looked directly at Elena but showed no fear. Elena stood up slowly and walked toward the deer. She moved carefully and kept her hands visible. When she was close enough, she gently touched the deer's neck. The deer stood still and seemed to enjoy the attention. This is incredible, David whispered. Elena scratched behind the deer's ears. Her name is Grace. She has been coming to see me for 5 years. She brings her babies here in the spring to show them that this is a safe place. After a few more minutes, Elena stepped back and the deer wandered back into the forest. My father could do that with any animal, Elena said as she sat back down by the fire. Bears, wolves, mountain lions, they all trusted him because they knew he would never hurt them. Could you teach me to do that? Maybe. It takes practice and patience, but I think you have the right kind of heart for it. As the weeks passed, David found himself falling in love with two things: the mountain and Elena. The mountain gave him peace and purpose. Elena gave him companionship and understanding. David had never met anyone like Elena. She was intelligent and kind, but also mysterious and magical. She knew things about life and nature that no one had ever taught David. And despite everything she had lost, she remained hopeful and gentle. Elena seemed to be falling in love with David too. She smiled more when he was around. She found excuses to touch his hand when they worked together. She looked forward to their conversations by the fire each evening. One morning in early October, David woke up to find the first snow of the season covering the ground. Elena was already up making coffee in the kitchen. Good morning, David said. I did not expect snow this early. The mountain decides when winter begins, Elena said. And this year, winter is coming early. David looked out the window at the white landscape. Everything looked different, covered in snow. More beautiful, but also more isolated. Elena, what happens in winter? Do you still stay here? Yes. Winter is when the mountain needs the most care. I spend my time making sure the animals have enough food and that the streams do not freeze completely. Will I be able to get to town if I need supplies? Elena handed David a cup of coffee. Not easily. The road becomes dangerous when it snows. Most people who live this far up the mountain stock up on supplies in the fall and do not leave until spring. David realized that winter would be a test of his commitment to this place. If he was going to make the promise that Elena's grandfather had made, he needed to know he could handle the isolation of mountain winter. Elena, I want to ask you something. What is it? David took a deep breath. I think I am falling in love with you. Elena set down her coffee cup and looked directly at David. I think I am falling in love with you too. Is that possible? I mean, given what you are? Elena walked over to David and took his hands in hers. I do not know what is possible, David. I have never been in love before. I died when I was 9 years old, before I had a chance to grow up and experience those feelings. But you feel them now? Yes. When I am with you, I feel things I have never felt before. I care about your happiness. I want to share my thoughts and experiences with you. I want to be close to you. David pulled Elena closer and looked into her eyes. I love you, Elena. I love your kindness and your knowledge and your connection to this place. I love how peaceful I feel when I am with you. Elena smiled and touched David's face gently. I love you too, David. I love how you listen to me and how you care about the mountain. I love how you make me feel less lonely. David leaned down and kissed Elena softly. Her lips were warm and real. She felt completely alive in his arms. Elena, David said after they broke apart, I want to stay here with you. I want to make your grandfather's promise and take care of this land. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Are you sure? Once you make that commitment, there is no going back. I am sure. My old life was empty and meaningless. Here with you, I have found something worth dedicating my life to. Elena hugged David tightly. I have hoped for this for so long, but I was afraid to believe it could happen. When do I make the promise? How does it work? Elena pulled back and looked at David seriously. There is a ceremony that must be performed at the place where my great-great-grandfather first made his agreement with the mountain spirit. It is a sacred place at the top of Summit Peak. When can we do the ceremony? The best time is during the winter solstice, when the mountain's power is strongest. But David, you need to understand something important. What? Elena's face became worried. Once you make the promise, you will be bound to this mountain for the rest of your life. You will age normally and eventually die, but you will never be able to leave this place for more than a few days. I understand. And there is something else. I do not know what will happen to me after you make the promise. I might be freed to move on to whatever comes after death, or I might be allowed to stay here with you. The mountain spirit will decide. David felt a chill of fear. What if the mountain decides you have to leave? Elena looked sad. Then I will have to leave. But at least I will know that the land I love is being cared for by someone who truly understands its value. David took Elena's hands again. I hope you get to stay. I cannot imagine being here without you. I hope so too, but even if I have to go, I will be grateful for the time we have had together. David and Elena spent the rest of the morning planning for the winter. They made lists of supplies they would need. They checked the cabin's heating system and made sure there was enough firewood. But mostly they talked about their future together. They dreamed about the improvements they could make to the property. They planned how they would expand the garden and maybe add some animals. For the first time since his divorce, David felt excited about the future. He had found love and purpose in a place he never expected. And in less than 3 months, he would make the commitment that would bind him to this magical mountain forever. David just hoped that Elena would be allowed to stay and share that future with him. Winter came to the mountain with surprising force. By November, snow covered everything in a thick white blanket. The road to town became impossible to drive, just as Elena had warned. David and Elena were completely cut off from the outside world. At first, David worried about the isolation. What if there was an emergency? What if they ran out of food or fuel? But Elena had planned well. They had enough supplies to last until spring, and the cabin stayed warm and comfortable even during the coldest nights. David discovered that winter on the mountain was beautiful and peaceful. Without the distractions of town or work, he and Elena spent their days reading, cooking, and talking by the fire. They played simple games and told each other stories about their lives. Elena taught David more about the mountain's history and the old ways of her family. She showed him how to make herbal teas from dried plants they had gathered in the fall. She taught him how to preserve food without refrigeration and how to predict the weather by watching the behavior of animals. David taught Elena about the modern world she had missed during her 20 years of being stuck between life and death. He told her about computers and smartphones and the internet. He described movies and music and books that had been created since she died. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I had lived, Elena said one snowy evening as they sat by the fire. Would I have gone to college? Would I have traveled to other countries? Would I have become a teacher or a doctor? Do you regret missing those experiences? David asked. Elena thought for a moment. I feel sad about missing them, but I do not regret staying here. This mountain needed me, and taking care of it has given my existence meaning. What do you think you would have studied in college? Probably biology or environmental science. I've always been fascinated by how living things connect to each other and to the land they live on. David smiled. You already know more about those subjects than most college professors. Knowledge from books is different from knowledge from experience. I know this mountain very well, but I know almost nothing about the rest of the world. If you could go anywhere in the world, where would you want to visit? Elena's eyes lit up. I would like to see the ocean. I have never seen water that goes on forever, and I would like to see a big city with millions of people. I want to understand how humans can live so close together without fighting all the time. David laughed. Trust me, people in cities fight plenty, just not usually with weapons. As December approached, David and Elena began preparing for the winter solstice ceremony. Elena explained that the ceremony had to be performed at midnight, on the longest night of the year at the sacred place on top of Summit Peak. The climb to the top is difficult even in good weather, Elena warned. In winter, it will be dangerous. Are you sure you want to do this? I am sure, David said. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Elena looked worried. David, I need to tell you something else about the ceremony. What is it? The mountain spirit will test you during the ceremony. It will show you visions of the life you are giving up. It will try to make you doubt your decision. What kind of visions? Different things for different people. Maybe it will show you returning to your job in Seattle. Maybe it will show you meeting another woman and having a normal family. Maybe it will show you traveling the world and having adventures. David felt nervous for the first time since deciding to make the promise. Why does the mountain spirit do that? To make sure your commitment is real. The mountain has been abandoned before. It will not accept a promise from someone who might change their mind later. What happens if I fail the test? Elena's face became very serious. Then you will not be bound to the mountain, but you will also not be welcome here anymore. You will have to leave and never return. What about you? I will continue as I have for the past 20 years. Alone. David took Elena's hands. I will not fail the test. I know what I want, and I want to stay here with you. Elena kissed David softly. I believe you. But the mountain spirit is very powerful. It knows how to find the deepest doubts in a person's heart. The night of the winter solstice was clear and bitterly cold. David and Elena bundled up in heavy coats and boots and began the climb to Summit Peak at 10 o'clock. They carried flashlights and rope and emergency supplies in case something went wrong. The trail to the peak was steep and covered with ice. Several times David slipped and nearly fell. Elena moved easily on the frozen ground, as if her feet could find traction where none existed. How are you so good at climbing in this weather? David asked during a rest stop. I am not entirely human anymore, Elena reminded him. I do not feel cold or pain the way you do. After 2 hours of difficult climbing, they reached the top of Summit Peak. David had never been this high on the mountain before. Even in the darkness, he could see for miles in every direction. The lights of Summit Ridge twinkled far below, and other mountain peaks stretched to the horizon. At the very top of the peak was a circle of ancient stones. The stones were covered with snow, but Elena brushed them clean to reveal symbols carved deep into the rock. This is where my great-great-grandfather first met the mountain spirit, Elena said. This is where he made the original promise that has bound my family to this land for over 150 years. David looked at the stone circle and felt something powerful and old watching him. The air seemed to vibrate with energy. What do I need to do? David asked. Elena led David to the center of the stone circle. Kneel down and place your hands flat on the ground. Then speak your promise to the mountain. David knelt in the snow and pressed his palms against the frozen earth. Immediately, he felt a shock of energy run through his body. The mountain was alive, and it was listening to him. Mountain Spirit, David said in a loud, clear voice, I promise to care for this land for the rest of my life. I promise to protect it and love it as Elena's family has done for generations. I promise never to abandon it or neglect it. As soon as David spoke the words, the world around him changed. The mountaintop disappeared and David found himself standing in his old apartment in Seattle. Sarah was there, looking beautiful and happy. David, I am so glad you came back, she said. I made a mistake when I left you. I want us to try again. David felt confused. Sarah looked real, but he knew this had to be the test Elena had warned him about. This is not real, David said. Sarah does not want me back. But she could, Sarah said. If you return to Seattle, you could have the life you always wanted. A successful career, a loving wife, children, a future. The vision shifted and David saw himself in a new office, receiving a promotion. His boss was shaking his hand and congratulating him on a big success. David looked happy and confident. You could be important, the vision said. You could make a difference in the world. On that mountain you will be forgotten. No one will know or care about your work. The vision shifted again. David saw himself traveling to exotic places, Paris, Tokyo, the Amazon rainforest. He was meeting interesting people and having exciting adventures. Think of everything you will miss, the vision said. Think of all the places you will never see, all the people you will never meet. Is one woman and one mountain really worth giving up the entire world? For a moment, David felt doubt creeping into his heart. The vision showed him a life full of success and adventure. Was he making a mistake by choosing isolation on the mountain? But then David remembered Elena's face when she told him about her 20 years of loneliness. He remembered the peace he had felt while working in the garden. He remembered the satisfaction of learning to live in harmony with nature instead of fighting against it. No, David said firmly. I do not want that life anymore. I want the life I found on the mountain. The visions disappeared, and David was back on the mountaintop. But now the stone circle was glowing with soft blue light. Elena was crying with joy. You passed the test, she said. The mountain has accepted your promise. David felt different, stronger and more connected to the earth beneath his feet. He could sense the life force of every tree and animal on the mountain. He understood that he was now part of something much larger than himself. What happens now? David asked. Elena looked around nervously. Now we wait to see what the mountain decides about me. The blue light grew brighter and a voice seemed to speak from the stones themselves. It did not use words, but David and Elena both understood its meaning. Elena Summit had fulfilled her duty. She had protected the land and found someone worthy to take her place. She was free to choose her own fate. Elena could move on to whatever, waited after death, or she could stay on the mountain with David. But if she chose to stay, she would become fully alive again. She would age normally and eventually die, just like any human. Elena looked at David with tears in her eyes. I choose to stay. I choose to live. The blue light surrounded Elena, and David watched in amazement as she began to change. Her skin became warmer. Her breathing became deeper. The timeless quality that had made her seem not quite real disappeared. Elena was alive again. Truly, completely alive. David took Elena in his arms and kissed her as snow began to fall around them. They had both made their choice. They would spend their lives together on this magical mountain, caring for the land and for each other. Spring came early to Summit Ridge that year. By March, the snow was melting and the first green shoots were pushing through the soil. David and Elena worked together to prepare the garden for a new growing season. But everything felt different now. Elena was fully alive, and David could see the change in everything she did. She got tired after working hard. She felt cold when the morning air was sharp. She even got small cuts and bruises that healed slowly. just like a normal person. Do you miss being the way you were before? David asked one morning as they planted seeds in the freshly turned soil. Elena wiped sweat from her forehead and smiled. Not at all. I feel more real now, more connected to my own life instead of just watching it happen. Are you happy with your choice? Elena stopped planting and looked directly at David. I have never been happier. For 20 years I existed without really living. Now I get to experience everything I missed. David understood what Elena meant. In the months since the winter solstice ceremony, he had watched Elena discover simple pleasures she had forgotten or never known. The taste of food when she was really hungry, the satisfaction of deep sleep after a long day of work, the way her body responded to David's touch with warmth and desire. But Elena's transformation was not the only change on the mountain. As spring progressed, David began to notice that the land itself was healing. The streams ran fuller and cleaner. Trees that had been dying grew new leaves. Animals returned to areas they had avoided for years. The mountain is becoming healthy. Again, Elena observed during one of their evening walks. I can feel its strength returning. David could feel it too. Through his connection to the mountain spirit, he sensed the land's growing vitality. The promise he had made was working. The mountain trusted him and was responding to his care. One day in April, Elena suggested they visit her father in town. David was nervous about leaving the mountain, but Elena assured him that short trips were allowed under his promise. I want him to meet you, Elena said. Even if he does not remember me clearly, I think he will like knowing that someone good is taking care of our family's land. The drive to town felt strange after months of isolation. David had grown so accustomed to the quiet of the mountain that the sounds of cars and people seemed loud and overwhelming. The Sunset Care Home was a small, clean building on the edge of Summit Ridge. Elena led David to a sunny room where an elderly man sat in a chair by the window. Thomas Summit was thin and frail, but his eyes were still sharp and intelligent. Hello, Papa, Elena said softly as she sat down next to him. Thomas looked at Elena for a long moment. You look familiar. Do I know you? I am Elena, your daughter. Thomas smiled with confusion. My daughter Elena is just a little girl. She is 9 years old. Elena took her father's hand gently. I grew up, Papa. I am 29 now. That is impossible. Elena died when she was 9. She drowned in the lake with her mother. David watched Elena struggle with pain and sadness. It was hard for her to see her father this way. Papa, I want you to meet someone, Elena said, changing the subject. This is David. He lives in our old cabin now. Thomas looked at David with interest. You live on Summit land? Yes, sir.